I like what he's done in Florida, the things that I've heard. I want to hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak.
Welcome back to America Decides. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis will speak in Iowa at a church before he heads to other events in the Hawkeye State tomorrow. For more, Ed O'Keefe and Jim DeFede join us now. Ed is CBS News senior White House and political correspondent. He joins us from beautiful Clive, Iowa. And Jim is CBS News Miami investigative reporter, and he joins us from Miami. Ed, so DeSantis is on the road, first event. What is his plan to win Iowa, and is he getting the kind of reception that might be consistent with that possibility?
Well, it's a little early to say on the second one, Major, but we are here outside a church in Clive, a suburb of Des Moines, where he is set to hold his first event as a declared presidential candidate tonight in a church sanctuary or theater that holds what looks like to be at least 300 people or so. So not a massive event, but not one of those smaller, more intimate ones either. Much of the bunting you're seeing here behind us is actually put up by his super PAC. That is going to be an interesting element of what he does here in Iowa. The hope is to not only build the traditional campaign that travels him, that advertises on his behalf, but then to rely on this super PAC, Never Back Down, that has raised tens of millions of dollars already and maybe getting tens of millions of dollars more from a PAC that the governor set up in Florida to work on some of the more intricate sort of ground level, door knocking, canvassing work that has to be done methodically in places like Iowa in order to succeed. We spoke earlier today with the spokeswoman for that PAC a little bit about what they're doing here to train hundreds of people to start knocking on doors in hopes of getting them to turn out come caucus time. Take a listen.
So far, we've knocked about 50,000 doors here in Iowa since the program started. We've had about 14,000 conversations at those doors. We anticipate going through the caucuses, we'll be able to touch each person about 4 times at their door to continue this conversation. A lot of people know Governor DeSantis' name. He's very well known. He's a very popular governor, but they don't know the story of the success of the work he's done.
So, again, you heard her say there, the goal is to reach, or they've already reached 50,000 households, spoken to about 14,000 people. Last I checked, it's still May, and they've done that, with the goal of eventually getting to those households 4 to 5 times between now and caucus time. That's what voters in this state expect, and that is something that Tim Scott, that Nikki Haley, that Mike Pence, that Asa Hutchinson, and yeah, Donald Trump don't have yet, and may never have in this state. And it's one of the reasons why the Florida governor's team remains so confident that ultimately they'll be able to pull it off. Among other things that this super PAC is doing outside the official campaign event, because that's as close as these PACs can get to the inside of an event, they're blasting the Top Gun theme, Major, because, of course, DeSantis served in the Navy.
Of course. Speaking of Top Gun or people who finish at the top, let's just go through a couple of names. 3, actually. Mike Huckabee, Rick Santorum, Ted Cruz. You know where I'm going, Ed. All 3 won the Iowa caucuses. Not one of them became the Republican nominee, or even close. Maybe Ted Cruz was the closest of those 3. You've got to do more than Iowa, right?
You do, which is what was interesting about our conversation with Erin Perini earlier today. She said, we are already working on deploying manpower to the first 18 states. That's Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada, the Super Tuesday states, and Florida. She says, that's the difference between what we're doing and what other campaigns do, which is they'll finish in Iowa and they immediately leapfrog that team from Iowa to Nevada and hope that they can set things up very quickly. Instead, they're using the tens of millions of dollars, the hundreds of millions they hope to raise at some point, to deploy those people after training them here in Iowa in hopes of being able to lay out a ground game for the governor that he and his campaign don't have to pay for. And this is the big difference in the super PAC era that we haven't seen yet. Is one of these multi-million-dollar operations not spending their money on, monogrammed flannels and expensive television advertising, but instead on the hard, thankless work of finding voters where they live, going back to them over and over again, and getting them to eventually turn out. If they can successfully do that, Major, that is different than what we've seen before, and it could be one of the things that helps the governor keep it even with former President Trump, at least early on, if not surpass him at some point. But again, that's going to take a long time. It's something we've not seen before. It's part of the reason why we wanted to be here from day one to assess it and see whether or not he has what may be necessary to win here and beyond.
Nothing like a monogrammed flannel half zip. I want to bring Jim DeFeeti into this conversation, and I want to do so by talking about Lev Parnas. And for those who don't remember, Lev Parnas, Ukrainian-American businessman, he worked with Rudy Giuliani to seek damaging information on Hunter Biden from Ukrainian government officials. That was all back in 2019. That same year, Parnas was arrested and later convicted of defrauding investors. Parnas later revealed what he says are more than 60 text messages between himself and Governor DeSantis.
I was a very big cannabis supporter, and I knew Ron at the time was not. He was anti-cannabis, and I made it clear to him. I said to him, "Listen, Ron," I said, "it's very difficult for me to support somebody that is going to go against things that I'm going to want in the state of Florida."
Because you wanted to open up dispensaries. You want to be involved in the marijuana market.
Correct, and that's when Ron turned around to me and said, "You know what? I would be open to thinking differently about cannabis if you were to get me Trump support."
So, Jim, break this down for us. What is Parnas driving at, and what, if anything, has DeSantis said about his knowledge of or relationship with Lev Parnas?
So that's where it gets interesting, because the entire relationship with Lev Parnas, according to Lev Parnas, is that Ron DeSantis wanted Lev Parnas to help him convince Giuliani and Trump to have a formal Trump endorsement. You may remember Donald Trump sent out a supportive tweet of Ron DeSantis in December of 2017, but he wanted it followed up with a more formal endorsement. And according to Parnas, DeSantis approached him in the lobby of the then Trump International Hotel in Washington, D.C., and asked him if he could help work on getting a formal Trump endorsement. Now, Ron DeSantis later would say, after Lev Parnas was arrested, that it was really no real relationship between the two of them. It was just simply a donor situation, nothing more. And then Lev Parnas came out with these 60-plus text messages that he says were between him and DeSantis during that period of time in 2018. It shows how much that Ron DeSantis really needed Donald Trump's support. Now, what did Lev Parnas want in return? He wanted to get into the marijuana business in Florida, which had legalized, not recreational, but medical marijuana, and wanted entry into that, and thought Ron DeSantis, if he became governor, could help him with that.
And have you seen those text messages, Jim?
I have. I've gone through, the entire spate of them. He also claims to have emails that he's still sorting through. And yeah, they do show a very cozy relationship. If Lev Parnas is correct, if these are indeed text messages between himself and Ron DeSantis, I will tell you that the phone number that he was texting with Ron DeSantis is a number that I had for Ron DeSantis back in 2018. And it's more than just the typical donor talk. It was gossiping about donors. It was very collegial, very informal, very friendly. Lev Parnas claims that he actually viewed Ron DeSantis as a friend and then felt betrayed by him when, after he became governor, turned his back on him.
We will file this under to be continued. Jim DeFeeti in Miami, Ed O'Keefe in Clive, Iowa. Thank you so very much.